one of them. Oh, is it this one? Yeah.
And just turn the volume down.
Someone else. Someone else. I'm on mute. I'm on mute.
Is the volume down on that one? Or is it coming from here? No, I think you fixed it, right?
No, we're not getting more.
Okay, Zoom people, can you hear me now?
Is it echoey or more echo? Perfect.
Yay.
Yeah, everyone better.
Okay, sweet.
All right.
Hello.
Hey. Hey.
Welcome.
Welcome. I've noticed everybody's wearing masks.
Yeah, they're right there.
Yeah,
Yeah. Hey, Roberto. Yeah. What? I did not know. He's my next door neighbor.
Oh my goodness, that's so funny. Thank you both for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Abby.
Oh, nice to meet you. Yes, my
Nice
name's
to
Al.
meet you. Al, thanks for
Yeah.
coming.
You're just in time. We literally are just about to start, so you're good.
Okay. That's a surprise for me. All right. Well, we both agree on the same topic.
That's so funny. Small world.
It's a total coincidence, so it's like, oh, wow.
That's so funny.
Anyways, yes, my name's Al Rodriguez. I don't know if you guys all introduced yourself.
Yeah, we
did a little bit.
I think you moved though. You went to Arizona, or was that? Or you?
Yeah, I did.
Oh wow.
Okay, you still, who are you?
Michael. Yeah.
Oh, Michael, of course, yes, you're the local leader. I remember now.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's just, I haven't been to an event in a while,
Yeah.
so I didn't know if anybody would recognize me.
I remember you, man. I remember most faces pretty well.
Oh, okay, wonderful. All right, without further ado.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, I just wanted to like go through the agenda a little bit so y'all know like what we're gonna get into. So first, we're gonna try to talk about what is fascism. We're just gonna like go over the definition a little bit to start off, and then we're gonna try to get into some examples because I think that'll really help us talk about it, like what it looks like in the real world versus just talking about it abstractly. And then Michael's gonna tell us about how capitalism and fascism are connected. And then John is gonna talk about the propaganda and the aesthetics of fascism. And then we're gonna talk about anti-fascist strategy and debates on strategies. And then we will tell you about DSA and connecting anti-fascism to our organization and our chapter. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do, just to like start getting into like what is fascism, is a little word cloud activity. So I hope everyone will participate. You can go on your phone and go to menti.com, and it's gonna ask you for a code. Yeah, menti.com.
Menti?
Yeah, menti.com.
Oh.
Ooh, fire, whoever said
Wow,
that.
people are already dropping them. That's awesome.
And then here's the code at the top, 14167088. And then you should just be able to, I didn't know if you could put more than one word. Apparently you can put more than one word. So feel free to put whatever comes to mind when you think of fashion. Yeah. menti.com. Minty.com.
So I'm just ready to go. Refresh it.
Trump.
I was thinking, remember from you again.
Oh no. We'll give it a minute.
Oh, no, wait, okay, what was it again?
14, 16, 70, 88. All right. We got boomerang in there. We got death cult.
Oh, death cult.
Collective cultism. Blowback, hyperconformity.
Suppression, boomerang. People know about the colonial boomerang. That's cool.
Honestly, that one even went over my head. I've never heard that.
We're gonna talk about it a little bit.
Yeah. Legalized.
Propaganda sucks. I love her said sucks. So true. Fear, that's really important. Legalized racism, collective cultism. Very true. Okay, I feel like that
It's still growing.
everybody, yeah?
We haven't hit a slowdown yet with it.
Autocracy, true.
False mythology. very good.
Mm-hmm. Police state, very true. I feel like one of the things that's difficult with fascism is when you start defining it, you use all these big words to define it, and then we have to talk about like what do those big words mean. So we'll have to get into that too.
All right, I think that's our word cloud right there.
Yeah, nice. And then maybe like at the end of the presentation, we can come to that and see if we've like thought about any different
Maybe add
words
to it or.
yeah, maybe add
like
to it.
revisiting it or something.
Yeah,
Destruction of unions. Oh yeah, that's a really good one.
oppression. Yeah. Really good thoughts, y'all. Thank you.
You want
Okay,
me
I
to
think we can go to the next slide. Yeah.
All right. Little thought experiment. Get the mental juices flowing.
Yeah.
This is this is a new way of doing it because not everybody's talking at once usually.
Yeah, we definitely like to try to like learn together and talk about things together. Yeah, you can go to the next one, or I can. Yeah, sweet. Okay, so first let's talk about what fascism is. I'm gonna go to the next slide. So the two main things I think that come to mind for a lot of people are extreme militarism and nationalism. So I guess just to like start out, it's good to know that many scholars have tried to define fascism and have debated about what it is. And a lot of times what they come up with as definition is either like a long list of features being like, here are these 14 things that come up in fascism, and not all of those features are going to apply to every single expression of fascism. And so it can be hard to like come up with one core definition that is true for everything. But instead of just struggling with that, we can think about what that means. And I think like one of the things that's important to note is that fascism adapts to its environment. So that's why it doesn't look like the same everywhere, because it's a tool that people are using to gain and maintain power. And so they're going to adapt their strategies and their emphases on the environment. And so let's see, there's so I think like we can just say one of the things on the slide is fascism portrays the majority as victims under threat. Marginalized communities are blamed for societal decline, and fear is used to justify oppression and violence. So fascism is trying to build a broad coalition, right, to be able to gain power and maintain power. So there's different strategies used to target different groups of people. Fascism targets capitalists by offering them material gains, and we're going to talk about that a little more later. And then a lot of times fascism appeals to workers and the masses through using a like religiosity and a mythology to really like appeal to people's emotions and pit people against each other instead of working together to improve all of our lives. It's about you need to step on that group of people to be able to improve your own life. So yeah.
I just found it interesting to note that the two main words there we didn't think of in the word cloud: nationalism and militarism.
Yeah.
They're two big synonyms or adjectives like that. So that's just interesting to know.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Yeah. Okay, so I did just want to mention that fascism was sort of originated like as a term in Italy in the early 1900s by Mussolini and this philosopher Gentile. And they're the ones who first like coined the term and were using it as such. But we're gonna try to focus on examples of fascism that we see in our lives now, because I think that's more pertinent to how do we actually deal with fascism and fight fascism. But just important to mention that that's where it comes from. And I guess just to mention that, like, I have this quote because one of the, I think, primary features of Italian fascism is sort of this totalitarianism, where they really wanted to take over every part of people's lives, that everything would be about supporting the leader, supporting the state, and carrying out the will of the state. So I think we should talk about how that's similar and different to fascism today. So then the US roots of fascism. So American fascism is a continuation of the settler colonial project. I think it's really cool that a lot of people already mentioned like the colonial boomerang, talking about how basically there's an idea that fascism is colonial violence turned inward on the imperial core. And I think it's really significant that when we talk about fascism, a lot of people think about fascist Italy and they think about Nazi Germany, but what about America? You know, what about the genocide of indigenous peoples that this country was founded on? And what about the genocide of African peoples and the slave trade? And also, like, what about the terror of the KKK that was carried out hand in hand with police and people who were officially part of the state, but also people who weren't, right? People who were just ordinary people, quote unquote, who were empowered to carry out state violence and terror. And yeah, the US political system, regardless of Trump, remains inherently anti-egalitarian and anti-progressive. So I think it's important to, obviously, I think we're going to talk about Trump a lot because it's our current circumstances. But I think it's important to remember that America was fascist before Trump, I would argue. And it's good to have kind of a broader view about what fascism is so that we don't just become focused on the details and lose sight of the whole American system. Okay, so this is just one example. I wanted to give you an example of a definition. Like what I was saying, a lot of times the definitions are these lists. And so there are a bunch of them and like they have some overlap, they have some differences. So this is one from an American political science, Stanley Payne. And his features of fascism are nationalism, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, imperialism, populism, emotionality, spirituality, and mysticism, violence, patriarchy, a focus on youth, and the worship of the leader. Yeah, Daniel, do you sure? Okay. So I guess I do want to ask, like, does it, because there's a lot of big words on here that are complicated. Yeah, Al?
I just want to note that it's extremely interesting, fascinating, and dangerous. The three words out there: emotionality, spiritualism, mysticism. In fascism, there is no seeming separation with church and state.
Mm-hmm.
In extreme forms of fascism,
Mm-hmm.
and they use those elements. You could even argue religion, and they merge it with the state or nationalism or patriotism, and or worship of the leader, hero worship, so to speak.
Exactly.
So I think that's one of the strongest tools that the fascists use. They play on that mysticism and just the unification of church and state at that point.
Absolutely.
Which is a big violation of democracy or any type of liberal government.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so definitely want to hit on another important feature of fascism, like you were saying, is targeting marginalized communities, basically trying to erase solidarity among people who were all part of the working class and are all being oppressed by the people in power. They have to pit us against each other and create these scapegoats. So in the US, fascists see immigrants, trans people, Black people, and others as enemies They claim these groups are working to eradicate their way of life, and this belief fuels policies and actions that harm marginalized communities, which is really important for us to continue to focus on when we're trying to do anti-fascist stuff. Okay, does anybody have questions about the first section or any more thoughts about, we're gonna get into the weeds a little bit more about like what exactly fascism is, but yeah.
I didn't know if you want, I didn't know if you want to discuss like examples in the US of like fascism or fascist tendencies or anything like that.
Yeah, that sounds good, if we want.
If we want.
Yeah,
I mean, the first, like, right-wing, like, fascist ideology I remember hearing about when I was a kid was, like, the Unabomber and Timothy McVeigh, those type of guys, but, like, that grew big time in recent years with the Proud Boys and all those,
Yep.
and all these other groups, the group out in Wisconsin or Minnesota that wanted to do something with Gretchen Whitmer. So, I mean, it's grown big time, and these groups have become more emboldened and more popular in the past 20, 30 years. I mean, they started out small with small guys like those guys that I mentioned in the 90s, but they grew in power and they grew in more organized, and it's actually very scary that they would, I don't know if it's lack of education, that they go through these ideologies, you know? I think it's a lack of education. Really. That's why they fall into these ideologies. And this cult-like behavior.
I do think lack of education is a huge part, and it's on a later slide, but like one of the features of fascism that comes up is this like simplified language and basically not allowing any disagreement, trying to dissuade people from doing critical thinking and having discussions and debate. So I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, Nick?
I would say fascism is a symptom of capitalism.
Mhm.
In relates to, eventually.
Oh, I'm getting there.
He's on top of it. Yeah.
I'm about to pop off.
Yeah, and we just said, chimed in here. But to your point, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Oh, my name's Al.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. It's certainly become more noticeable in the last 20 to 30 years. And forgive me, I'm trained as an historian, so I'm always going to be talking about things. Even as far back as you had, anti-New Dealers, et cetera, and then through the 50s into the growth particularly of like the John Birch Society. I think the key difference is that the barrier to entry for that now is so much lower. I mean, back in those days, you had to have a favorable newspaper or a favorable radio station, and you were still limited by the reach of that publication or whatever. You still have to shell out money to print out your pamphlets or put up billboards that say impeach Earl Warren. Now anybody with a smartphone and free software can be their own one person PR firm. So yeah, and I think that lends itself to what you were saying, is that it seems to have just proliferated. I mean, even to use your example, the Unabomber, the guy still had to handwrite or type things out and go to the post office. And it wasn't, what was that, the mid-90s, I think. And part of it was his ideology that he didn't really want to be in this neural network or internet or whatever, but also part of it is what he chose to do. I think if he had been more willing to engage in the use of technology, you'd be seeing things like Proud Boys or other groups that are just amplified all of a sudden by just the instantaneous, the diffuse and instantaneous nature of communication.
Well, speaking of erasure, I mean, there was also that report by the FBI that was in the early 2000s or mid 2000s about how right-wing terrorism was going to be a big feature in the future, and So for Republicans, they were like, no, you can't say that. They
Yep.
basically had that entire report scrubbed and, deleted because they're like, that makes us look bad, but that's what you guys are into.
Absolutely. Yes.
I read this book called Doppelganger by Naomi Klein.
Yeah.
Which is about her, being confused online with somebody.
Yes.
Naomi Wolf, yeah.
Yeah, Naomi
She
Wolf.
said that, capitalism, that, fascism is doppelganger socialism. So it kind of takes the values or like the ideas of socialism and inverts them. And, kind of like onto the colonial boomerang.
Yeah.
Like Hitler is kind of the colonial boomerang of the Western nations, by turning in like what they had done to other peoples, because he based everything on what a lot of what he did off what the Americans did to the Americans,
Mhm.
or how ghettoized Black people in this country turned it inward to its own people, so they were kind of horrified at the reflection of the and also I think that a large part of it is social media. The fact that so much of our communication is an actual communication. I mean, we're not.
Yes.
About
Mhm.
and it's, it seems hoity-toity, but like it's easy to like dehumanize people. You're not all, if you're in your household, you're living into the screen.
Right. Can we pause for just a second, because I love that we have this problem. Some of the Zoom attendees are asking, say, have your phone and want to call in and just mute yourself
Okay.
when you're speaking.
I think Michael maybe can like move around.
Oh,
the-
Yeah, because that's the mic, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if just in the future, if you're gonna talk, I'll just run over.
We're gonna do it.
Yeah.
Talk show style.
We got this, we got this.
Yeah, so who else has an example of like how we're seeing fascism here or somewhere else in the real world? Yeah.
Kind of silly, but I'm a huge Panthers fan, so anytime I go to like a game or something, I felt like in the last couple of years. Oh, sorry. Like I'm a huge Panthers fan, not to like bring in sports into this, but whatever, we're back-to-back champs, so I have to. But I noticed when I would go to events, I'm the one who put the word jingoism up there.
Okay.
And that I think it's easy for people to fall for. And I would notice it at all the games, like the USA chants. There's, the whole patriotism thing, and like, what has Canada really done to us? Nothing. And
Oh, you're talking about the Panthers?
yeah,
Yeah,
every time I would go there, it's like
Yes.
USA, like this has nothing to do with Canada. Most of our players are Canadian, so it's just like I think the fascism has seeped into, as silly as it sounds, I'm not trying to make something huge out of it, but it is something that I never noticed before when I would go to the games, and now it's like this big, the whole patriotism thing, and it's just run rampant, and it's not upsetting, it's just kind of like, what are we doing? Like,
Well, we're gonna talk about
Yeah.
that. And,
yeah, they're doing propaganda without knowing it.
Sports example,
Yeah.
like the proliferation of sports betting that's going on right now, like the amount of like draft games out that I see.
Yeah.
And legalization of sports betting, I mean, that's pretty some as well, and I think like that's obviously an arm of like capitalism, and I think it's a way to control the population.
Yeah.
The fascist maneuver. I think sports does play a big part in that.
It's certainly distracting.
Right.
Over on the mic.
Oh, my God, yeah.
Okay, yeah, how I see capitalism and fascism are connected is how we've been seeing the elimination of good things in order to turn a profit, such as the elimination of environmental rights, the elimination of unions, the making it harder for people to vote, especially women, the growth of the private prison system, the eradication of public education, the eradication of any effort to provide healthcare to people, such as the Affordable Care Act. The elimination of all these good things, someone makes a profit from, which is why they're being eliminated.
Absolutely. I think we can kind of like connect some of those things, like what you were saying about like sports betting and what you were saying about the like chanting USA and everything. Like, I think it all ties into, and also like defunding education. It all ties into trying to just get us in this emotional state of just like chanting USA, USA, like feels good, and not critically thinking about like what is our country doing to the rest of the world? What are we doing to our own people? And instead just staying in a very like emotional place of like being on social media, like gambling obviously is like very addictive. It like gets you in this like mindset of just like your reward pathways and not critically thinking about what's going on around you. So I definitely think those things are tied. Yeah.
This will be my last commentary. And we're about to delve into this topic, which is how capitalism and fascism are connected. But in addition to the merger of the state and religion, there is also the merger. I think we're going to delve in the state and the corporations and the top 1%, which in effect does a corporate kleptocracy of sorts. And that's what's going on right now. And basically, this kleptocracy is going to benefit this top 1% by giving them all the benefits, while the architects of this fascist system, their greatest tool is lack of education or ignorance. And that's all I had to say for that in that topic. Here you go.
Also, it's kind of like like with social media, with even the sports gambling, like it's all about, and the prioritization of the billionaires and the 1%, like these corporate interests. It's how much money could be extracted from the citizens, because social media, it's like Beyonce said, you are the product. Like, we are the product that's being sold. Our attention is being sold, and we're being addicted into these websites so that we could buy things, so that we could sports gamble. It doesn't matter how detrimental these things are to us, because as long as they're making people money, that's fine. Everything's about making our lives more efficient and more, less humanistic in a way. Like, it's less about our connections. It's less about taking care of people. It's less about, well, is this right? That doesn't really seem to matter anymore, or to these people. And like, frankly, it's not really, it's on both sides of that. We could say everything we want about Trump and the Republicans, but like, we can. But a lot of the Democratic Party too does not view these collective views, these more collective humanistic approaches to policymaking as hostile and antithetical to what they stand for. And like, they aid and abet too. I mean, Kamala Harris was running on passing Trump's border like bill. Girl, like,
And being tough on Iran.
yeah, like, please, like, how could you? And like, I'm not gonna pretend like she's anywhere close to him, but like, when you equivocate like that, when you say that these people are worth throwing under the bus for votes, not a good thing that you lost, because we're kind of screwed now. But like, you kind of had it coming. So.
I think it's, if anybody on Zoom wants to say anything, we can.
Oh, yeah, that'd be
Turn
great.
up the volume.
Yeah. Okay, anybody on Zoom? Do y'all wanna ask a question or share some thoughts? We can turn up the volume so everyone here can hear you.
I actually have some thoughts to share. I was thinking about how fascism kind of erases the complexity of human thought. And here's one way I kind of look at this. Like, I feel like we're all being made to hate each other by fascism. And you can see this, like, Iranian Israelis and like all these sides to pick, when in reality, I'm pretty sure that most of us just don't want to see any children dying. So it's like, I don't care if someone is like the son of a Trumpy, like I don't want to see any like kids dying. So I feel like fascism like kind of forcing you, and that's why you see like the US government funding a lot of terrorist groups, a lot of radical groups, injecting in radical groups, and like pushing them towards this misdirected violence. So you can see that with the Taliban, for example, like US funded Taliban all the way. And it took a right-wing extremist ideal. The people were angry and they took that. And I'm sure there's some good people that got funneled into that. And a lot of the minority racial groups of Afghanistan were erased. When in reality, they're all still there and they're all still surviving. So that's something to pay attention to with fascism. So I realize they kind of like to use our own anger against us. But yeah, that's all.
Thank you so much, Nico. That's a really important point.
Like maybe like 2 or 3 more.
Yeah, really quickly, in addition to, what was it, Nicholas?
Uh-huh.
Yes, Nicholas' point, that is the oldest strategy of control, divide and conquer. And that goes along, a word for that is tribalism or factionalism. But that's the main strategy of control these fascists rely on. Just something to talk about. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Yes. Zeb, go ahead.
I don't know if this was already mentioned, but for example, how Trump tries to talk about make America great again. I think that's one way to kind of exploit the idea of order and strength and national rebirth as a way to, I like in Italy in the 1920s and the 1930s in Germany, how fascism rose due to instability, inflation, recession, and it seems that that's would be one practical example of how fascism is kind of neo-fascism is returning, or this is a new reoccurring kind of issue. But that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeb. No, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and also they tend to minimize the violence that actually occurs the right way, which is so
Absolutely.
lawmakers. And then when there is a leftist or a non-rightist person that says something
Exactly.
that's considered extreme violence, oh my gosh, that is something. Call us out, that they consider that violence, but not actual real.
Yes. Yes. That's a really important point. Yes.
They rely on hyperbole a lot and just propaganda, pure propaganda. That's what that is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we're gonna try to move on to the next section so we can stay on time. So
Yeah, that's, I was just checking.
Michael,
Okay,
you ready?
Yeah.
You wanna sit here?
yeah, I consider Stan, I don't want. I get a little pacey when I talk, honestly. Okay, how capitalism and fascism are connected. Most important thing to remember when it comes down to capitalism is their class interest, right? There's 2 opposing interests. There's the majority of people, workers, and there's the minority, which are capitalists, right? Those are the ruling class, so those people currently own the means of production, right? Your industry and everything. Ruling class want more control in as few hands as possible, for themselves and their small cohorts, if you will. They want private ownership, as many things as possible. That we have this library, for example, is public. That would not go down, if it was up to capitalists entirely. You have the control of control of wage relations of employees, and on the opposite side, you have the working class. You want more control in your means of production and work. You want public ownership. You want more things like libraries, fire stations are another example people use, and you want self-determined wages. You want to be able to decide based on the production that you have, what your wages are, your output that if your productivity increases, you want those to follow with your wages as well. So how do you get here, right? How do you end up having these ideas just become so popular so quickly? it doesn't just happen because all of a sudden people overnight just decide they're going to become bigoted and racist and hate each other. It's not because it's just this earworm that people go like, oh my God, these are actually really good ideas. Never thought of it before, but now it's really starting to catch on after hearing it for the millionth time. As socialists, the reason I am so staunchly firm, because I know that with socialism, it's the material conditions that create the ideology. That was one thing that when Marx started talking about it, it caught on in a very weird way because people are used to their ideology following the material conditions, right? They believe that, for example, oh, if everyone's good, if everyone's religious and everything like that, then the world would just continue to be good. But in the reality, the material conditions that you have and survive in affect the way you think about the world. And an example of this is this timeline that we have here, right? So I'm going to try and make it as brief as possible. There's a lot here, obviously, but I won't go into too much detail. In World War I, right, you had the war effort. You had a lot of states needing to collectivize and nationalize their industries. You had, for the first time, workers being essentially employed by the state in such a capacity that the market was basically pushed out. They said, we don't have time for this. We don't have time for the competition and the laissez-faire and all that kind of stuff. We need supplies and we need to make as much as possible. And we need people to be working, as many people to be working. So it hired in large numbers and it planned out its economy. And this was very socialist. I mean, this was an idea that people were not expecting. So for the first time, you had people realizing their value as workers. They had the opportunity to be important. They even, so, you know, you're part of the war effort. You're making production. You're helping us do it for the nation. You know, it was very nationalist, obviously. But at the same time, you had people going like, well, we're important. Like workers are important. Like we run this economy. Absolutely. And so that led into what's called the Red Years, which got really popular in Italy. Britain is another example. The book that I'm pulling from most of all is The Capital Order by Clara Mattei. How economists invented austerity, which paved the way to fascism. Remarkable book. I ripped 99% of it from that. The other one is Fascism in Big Business by Daniel Buren, I think, from like the 40s or something. Really awesome book too. But anyway, the Red Years, what made this unique is you had people basically, once the war, you know, ended, workers didn't want to give up what they just got. They wanted to be a part of the economy in a larger capacity. So you had large union campaigns, you had worker councils being formed, and this spread, you know, like, I mean, all over. And that didn't really make capitalists very happy. That didn't make business owners very happy. And so just like we have every opportunity to organize and collectivize and think, how are we going to solve the problems of our world and economy, they did it. They met up. The two examples are Brussels in 1920s and Genoa, Italy in 1922. They met up. It was big financial bros and, you know, tech bros and all these things at the time, economists, and they basically said, how can we look at the economy in a way that it'll solidify, you know, we don't want this to happen again. This is a bad idea. We don't want workers to know their value. We don't want people to understand what they can do for the economy when it's given to them. So austerity became the big idea. And essentially austerity, simplified, are these three principles, right? You have fiscal austerity, which these are going to all sound very familiar and very poignant, very topical. Fiscal austerity, regressive taxation. Okay, basically the taxes for the very wealthy, you're good, you're totally fine. Everyone else gets taxed much harder. Second one is monetary austerity. So that's increased interest rates, which I'm sure we're all experiencing as well, and on loans and other things. And then industrial austerity. And industrial austerity largely is layoffs of public employees and wage reduction and union busting. Okay, so these ideas were being promoted, almost like how we do literature, pamphlets. Hey, if you're going to run your economy, run it this way. If you want to benefit your capitalist friends, do it this way. This is the best way we can you know, run this economy. And so what ended up happening is fascism took off using those policies. The exact policies that we see in fascism are reflected from austerity policies. So you have the idea of fascism being implemented to stabilize class relations. They wanted to disempower workers, and they wanted to essentially calcify this so it never could happen again. We do not want workers to know their value. We do not want workers to understand what they can do with the economy. And how can we do this in a way that we're not going to explain economics to workers? So you scapegoat, right? So basically, as you're being distracted and going like, oh, this is the economy is not doing well right now. This is why. Pay no regard to the fact that we're doing all of this right here. This is why it's them. They're doing this. This is the problem. And if we can just keep doing this on the side, we can keep doing this in reality, right? And so that's how you end up getting these popular ideas, because people don't know economics as well as they should. And economics is not difficult to understand because they try to make it confusing. They try to say this is the natural way of things. You have to run the economy this way. And most people are not going to challenge that. So they end up blaming other people. They end up blaming communities. This great quote, Antonio Gramsci, economics is not a science of economic reality as it is, but is a science of reality as men want to build it. And that's a big one. In the end of the day, I knew you'd like that. Economics is far more politics than it is science. Always remember that. It's one of the first things that really, even before I really went into like socialism, it really took off. And it's like, oh, you can manipulate it and you can change it and form it and shape it. And that is the biggest thing that people don't want workers to know, that economics is something you can control as a group of people. Any questions before I move on to the next slide?
One thing I remember consuming at some point is that the standard argument against socialism or anything other than unfettered capitalism is like, oh, well, planned economies don't work. The fact is, we live in a planned economy. It's who does the planning. It's not, it's not somebody democratically elected. It is, the buyers at Walmart or Publix saying, we need to have, we need to buy cans of corn at this price. Rather than, as I said, a collective decision that cans of corn need to be priced as is. It's very, that was my whole.
I mean, look at the entire dairy industry or agriculture industry,
Right.
corn. Yeah.
Economics are taught, this is just how economics is, I guess. And nobody says, wait, economics the way you guys want it,
Right.
not necessarily for the way they frame it as this is good for the economy, but not necessarily, is it just good in general? Probably not. No.
Right.
So they're stuck in that, I guess, it's just austerity
Very well said.
economics all the time.
Daniel?
There's this term called the Darbo.
Yeah.
Which means deny attack diversity.
Oh, wait, microphone. Sorry.
Garbo?
Yeah, it's an acronym called DARVO, and it means deny, attack, reverse, victim, and defender. And you see it a lot it's mostly in like abuse that you see it. So like you'll say, oh, you did this to me. And it's like, no, deny, attack. You made me do this. I'm the victim here. And you see that a lot, like even when we're talking about just fascism in general, as like the majority attacking the minority, it's kind of it's like reversing the victim and the offender, and like kind of switching the numerator and the denominator. And we see that with the rich, like, oh, you poor people need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps while they're getting tax cuts because they can't, oh, well, we won't make money. Okay, well, you would tell like a small business to just figure it out. Like, you're not planning you're not planning well enough. Like, it's your fault. But with these big business owners, it's like corporate welfare.
If we were talking about austerity, like I think it's really important to like zoom out a little bit to like the globe and think about how colonial powers, including the US, have been so successful in spreading these austerity economies to the rest of the world, like so viciously, by using the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, to basically like after colonialism, after like robbing all of these countries of their wealth and resources, after assassinating or destroying their democratically elected parents, and anytime they try to move towards egalitarianism or socialism, then we're basically offering them these loans saying, oh, we'll give you this money so that you can help your people and become and improve their lives. And all you have to do is this and this and this. And this and this and this is usually austerity measures. It's literally this. It's austerity, right? And so I think it's important, like, not only to think about like the US, but it's important to think about like how we have just done untold violence through spreading this horrible system to the rest of the world. So
I guess you would define that as neo-colonialism. It's a new form of colonialism.
Oftentimes too, I mean, again, very, very timely, very topical. A government is not, people say, oh, the government's not efficient. It's not working right now. It's just, we tried, but this isn't working. If you could just cut and slash and put aside here, and I mean, that's essentially how many people were like, you know, I don't really know, I'm kind of on the fence, but then they talk about how like there's so much bureaucracy in the government, and if we could just hack away at that, then we'd be good. And like that's essentially this. And that's how you get even people who aren't entirely, you know, foaming at the mouth bigots to be like, well, I mean, this isn't, I mean, I don't really got much to go, so like maybe we can try this out. And that's essentially that's the trickery, that's the foolery, is that idea that, you know, it's like, you know, I really hate all the other stuff, but the economy is not working for me. So like maybe they're right. Maybe if we could just change it a little bit, but none of those things are in the best interest of people, you know, none of those things are in the best interest of workers. And it's the system that is never sustainable, you know, it's always depleting and always regressing. So yeah, so that moves on to the
When you say it's always depleting or not sustainable, that's the big contradiction with capitalism. How could you have infinite growth on a finite planet? It doesn't make any sense.
And also, you know, what's oftentimes too, just like earlier I said, you know, the ideas of socialism, especially the material conditions, create the ideology and form the ideology. Historically, that is tracked to be right. But with fascism, it's the idea of the inverse of that. Your ideas are just, if we could just really, truly, it's almost like holding onto a stone and hoping it'll turn into something else. And we could just squeeze this, we can get water out of it. And anyone who disagrees is the enemy, and they're trying to trick us and blah, 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 you know, so on and so forth. So to, I think, sum up, I think this is the last slide next to it for my, this section here. So yeah, fascism is capitalism's endgame. Fascism is a decaying stage of capitalism because the contradictions of capitalism start to show. They start to surface and reveal themselves, and people start to feel it. I mean, in large numbers. And as it grows, fascism, biggest trick again is to exploit the discontent of the masses. It's hoping essentially that if you can obfuscate blame to other people and other groups, we can build on this, right? And the biggest groups tend to be the middle class, veterans, and the youth. And those people tend to they feel it, you know? And the thing is, because the luxuries, especially of middle class lifestyle that people get so used to, they're very quick to jump on it because, again, you know, I don't like these ideas. I don't like that this person's bigoted and what they say, but like at the same time, these other things, I mean, if it's going to benefit me, I don't want to like.
My 401k.
Yeah, I like what I got going here. So capitalists, with the help of economists and industry moguls, attempt to naturalize capitalist economics. What Nick was saying earlier with business class, essentially. This is just how it is. This is just how the economy is supposed to run. This is how the economy works. Again, Claire, I'm gonna tell you, I gotta bring it back to this incredible author. If you don't mind playing that for me. Oh, my volume's down. That I muted it. I might have to mute one of these. I'll mute yours. Okay, did you? There we go. Go on.
So like I
Thank
was
you.
saying before, they naturalize, and this is scary to think, with the call, quote unquote, intimacy in social media of thoughts, they try to naturalize our relations to these really deplorable people. I mean, the richest man in the world, and the example of X and Twitter, to his thoughts and his way of thinking, and it's just a constant push of this far right propaganda and quasi-fascist ideology. And that's the way they naturalize it. If you're on X, that's the way to naturalize it, because they're constantly promoting their ideology, and you feel like you relate to it because, hey, I'm on his social media, and they push it hard. That's all I have to say. Go ahead.
Back off of what you're saying about social media. But I think it runs deeper than social media because it's always been part of our, I guess, our national psyche is, the rugged individualism. Um, it's cliche, but picking yourself up from the bootstraps. How many times have we heard that from our parents? Not that there's anything wrong with hard work. It's just everything is viewed from the lens of how can I extract the most profit from my own labor? And I think it's just taken root in everybody, people that you would think are, and they are good people. Our parents, I would hope, are good people, but even they do, or family members, it's just all about, oh, well, the glorification of these CEOs and stuff like that. Like today I was watching Sunday Morning with my parents, and the Uber CEO came on. Oh, Trump is so bad. Like I hated when he said that about Muslims because he's Iranian. And then they asked him, "Hey, so why are you working with Trump now?" He's like, "Well, there," and it's just like, and then my dad, funnily enough, was like, "Oh, he's got to make money," and I'm like, "There's your problem," and it kind of like triggered him. He was like, "What do you mean?" Like, it's just so anything contrary to that is not natural and is a bad idea. And even people that you would think you're agreeable with that are my parents are anti-Trump all the way. But if I try to talk about what I think, it's just, oh my God. So even the fascism has taken root in people that you would think are moderate. That's why he was saying it's important not to just be like, oh, Trump's bad. It's like, well, it's always been bad. It's just getting even worse than it already was. And I think, I don't know, I'm probably going off on a tangent, but to sum it up, I think a lot of the psyche that we have as a nation is centered around capitalism and how can we work hard? How can we work hard? But in reality is a lot of this stuff is not really working hard. I'm a paralegal. I'm about to become a lawyer. I work at a law firm. I had to go one day. It's too late. I'm already $200,000 in debt. But I had to. My boss does a lot of family law stuff like that. And I would think, I'm sure there's ways as lawyers that we exploit people, but I think if you're a lawyer, you're like, okay, I'm making money off of my own labor, which is true. But then comes a time when my boss comes to my office, hey, you want to help me with this eviction? And it's like, I don't want to, but if I say no, I'm gonna get fired. And it's so ingrained in just everything. And funnily enough, it's Section 8 housing. So I have eviction notice and I was like, I don't want to do this. The lady came outside, was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I felt so icky. Yeah. And I think I was already radicalized by that point, but that part has got me really, it's crazy how ingrained, even when you tell normal people that, they're like, why do you care? The person didn't pay their rent. And it's like, he's got to make money somehow. And it's like, well, he's not doing shit. He's just buying a house. That's all he did was buy a house. And that's literally all he did. And he just says, I'm going to come collect rent. So I think that's the way that, I don't know, it's a lot deeper than just capitalism good. It's how we were taught from the day we were born, pretty much.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
pass this to Daniel, but I will say on to
Daniel?
Yeah.
what is, if anyone knows the idea of cultural hegemony, the idea that like essentially you as working class people adopt the ideology of the ruling class of capitalist. Antonio Gramsci, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the Gramsci expert, coined that term, cultural hegemony, and that is something I think that essentially, again, naturalizing the system, we see all the time in everything. I mean, pop culture especially. Yeah.
I was just gonna say that fascists are successful because they speak to, like, the way that they maintain the current class relations, that they speak to the like fears and concerns of people that are real, but then they're lying, right? And they're offering these false promises that if you just get rid of this group of people, if we just do this, we'll go back. But like we know that's not going to happen. And what they're doing really is that they're exploiting that fear to maintain the structure, because really they don't want to change anything. They just want to get rid of these people. And like, I guess if you get rid of them, you'll get their jobs. Like I was reading, like during the Holocaust, like they would German people, or like the people who would lived in like the places that were taken over by the German Nazis, they would move into the houses of the Jewish people who were expelled and steal their stuff. Like they literally took the stuff from them and like made money off of it. And like so like they kind of lie to us. And if there's no opposition party that is speaking to those needs of people, we can't really blame people for being like, well, you know what? If you're saying that things are okay, and I know that things aren't okay, Like, why should I vote for you? And I think that's like, it's easy to say like, well, because they're fascists or whatever, like, and yeah, it's true, because they're lying to you. Like they're not going to make things better. They're going to make things worse. You know that. But like, if that's not being articulated to people and that's not even in like the stream of discourse, like how are you supposed to know that? You know? And I like what's your name? Sorry. No, his Nick, like what Nick said, like, there's kind of like, we're like ingrained and indoctrinated into the system where like where we make decisions where like we have to like evict someone, or we buy from Shein and knowing that the product is shit and that people are making bad wages and that it like dissipates in the wash, but like who cares, it's $1, like we make these little decisions that kind of wears away at like our sense of like, well, actually this is wrong, when we decide like, well, yeah, it's wrong, but you know what, it makes my life easier. And then eventually, nothing good trickles, and that comes back to us. Like the bad wages and the bad working conditions in the Shein factories across the world eventually make their way over here. So.
I'm gonna pass it now to John.
Sorry, can I?
What was that?
Does anybody want to, break or?
Yeah, okay, I'll pass it to Rimmel, and then, is anyone on Zoom, and then we'll do a break? Or if anyone on Zoom wants to say anything after, then we'll, yeah. Oh, sorry.
I'll make this quick. And I think we might even touch on this because I see the next slide coming up here. But I just wanted to mention like the insidious nature that like feminist politics has taken in the last 10 years. And I think like feminist politics, I think everything comes back to that. And I think it's been a canary in the coal mine for like what we've been seeing in the last few years. And just like the way that when we talk about like the naturalization of like class relations and how that's been kind of normalized in the last few years, I think there's so much messaging out there like, oh, like starting off with like the lean in, like messaging over in like the Obama years about like, oh, women CEOs, and like it's actually feminist to be like a boss and like work in like a corporate environment and be a CEO, and you're still like, perpetuating those same working conditions, same ones like if a man was a CEO. And it's just, I think a lot of like the aesthetics of fascism we're seeing now too comes into play in that as well. Like, oh, it's actually feminist to like change up your entire face and like look a certain way. And, like those are good things. And so I think like that also like you're made to believe like, oh, it's actually feminist and I can't say anything if a woman is a CEO and like, paying like minimum wage, like less than minimum wage to their employees and workers. So just wanted to mention that.
Or like Iran treats women badly, so let's bomb Iran.
Yeah, let's bomb them. Yeah, yeah. No, totally.
All right. No, okay, thank you.
I'm done, then I'll do it. Yep. All right, how about now?
Can you guys hear us? Okay, in the Zoom? Oh, we'll just move into, okay, yeah, we gotta get.
All right, got confirmation? Okay.
Thank you.
This isn't gonna be very visual. I'm mostly just gonna talk. But to get back to what I was saying, I was glad that the discussion was going where it was, because why do we have these internalized positions in terms of if you're poor, it's because of lack of effort, or the way things are, the way things are supposed to be, and it's propaganda. And I think just in terms of talking at the current moment, this is really tempting to me to consider this in the lens of Marx's famous statement about history, basically history repeating itself. First time is tragedy, second time is farce. Because if you have enough of a lens to look back of it, so much of what we're living through is on the surface very laughable, but just underneath very terrifying. I think our central theme is just going to be the use overall of aesthetics and propaganda in fascist regimes, pardon me, and the ways in which similar tactics can be observed in our contemporary political discourse and media. And one of the reasons that I didn't want this to be too slide heavy is because I think if you're interested enough to have come to this presentation, I don't need to show you what a Nazi rally looked like, or what Mussolini speaking from the balcony looked like. I think the broader hope for my part of this is to equip you with maybe the critical eye or the tools to identify what the aesthetics and the propaganda are, to maybe better insulate yourself from and others, because that's part of what we're trying to do here, is to educate you so that when you speak to your parents or other people in broader communities, you have the tools to draw their attention to these contradictions or other problems. Just a brief rundown. I think historically, again, talking about aesthetics, and here I'm talking about kind of the external presentations of a culture or a society, whether it be architecture, imagery, fashion, other things along those lines are kind of classically what I think of when I think of aesthetics. It's really the visual and tangible symbols that we know. So these are going to be the symbols that we all know that I didn't want to put up on the screen, such as the ancient symbol from the Hindu subcontinent that now can't be used for anything. The eagle, very strongly in German fascism, Italian fascism, American fascism, and the use of militarized or militaristic or uniformed groups to project or evoke power and order, which the point of that is to create kind of a unified or unifying identity that's easily recognizable, authoritative, and again, very emotionally charged. We were talking earlier about, and we'll get to this more a little bit in a moment, the fact that the symbols of patriotism seem to be everywhere. There's nowhere, well, actually this room doesn't have one, that's, no meeting room that doesn't seem to have an American flag, or standing for the national anthem at every single sports event. So in terms of current symbols and imagery, I think the flag obviously is probably the American symbol, to the exception of all others. Maybe a bald eagle, and a bald eagle with an American flag, that's about as American as you get. Red hats, and when you think about it, I don't know if anybody else has had this discussion. It's like, what is it? It's just a flag. Why should it be, in some ways offensive to people as opposed to just a representation? And you get into, well, what is it a representation of? What does it mean to you? Red hats. It's just a red hat with some particularly bad embroidery on it. Why is it so powerful, both to those who wear it and to those who see it? And I think that we are well enough acquainted with that imagery now that it doesn't even bother us anymore. You expect to see the American flag hanging over a hockey rink or in a meeting room or something where there's no real purpose for it to be there. And I think in a lot of ways that's sort of softened the notion of, well, what am I trying to say? I'm going to give the example and maybe we can talk through it together. Why do police now wear basically battle fatigues? I mean, it used to be where policemen wore a tie. Now they're basically dressed in body armor. And it's become even such now that you have the Secretary of Homeland Security showing up on TV ads wearing body armor and a hat. But yet she's got the perfect hair, the pearl earrings. What is this? What are the external aesthetics driving in terms of the propaganda of the administration or the culture? And when I was preparing for this, it seemed kind of interesting to me that at least the two historical groups that we are discussing, being Germany and Italy, have similar recent political histories. They were all unified roughly around the same time in the middle of the 19th century. Again, largely along linguistic and ethnic lines, which is something that I think we had discussed previously when we were, Payne's, the description of fascism. And I think Echo also says that language or ethnicity can be a unifying factor. But the thing is that they were both kind of unified. They didn't quite get to where they wanted to be. And there's these notions, and forgive me for you jumping into jargon here if you need me to explain it, or I will explain it. You kind of have this lesser Germany, what's called Kleindeutschland, which was, okay, we unified, but we didn't get Austria. Well, so when the Nazis come, what is one of the first things that they do? They absorb Austria into this to kind of fulfill this national purpose or prophecy. Again, unifying along language or ethnic lines. Italy is somewhat similar, that they have this notion of unredeemed Italy. Unredeemed meaning it's not part of Italy anymore. So parts of the Adriatic coast, I think some territories in North Africa, etc. So this is where the colonial drive starts to creep back in, because at this point in the 19th century, you have the race for Africa, where European countries are trying not only for natural resources, but just as a point of national pride, to have territories outside their boundaries that they control directly. So I think that's, again, and we're getting kind of into the aesthetics here when we have, although this seems to have dropped off the radar screen now, let's annex Greenland or make Canada the 51st state. It's farcical, but there's something behind it, because I think one of the things that we need to remember is that all these kind of discussions tend to broaden the scope of what is acceptable. So it's like, well, okay, so we didn't take Canada, but we did actually, have a better trade agreement or whatever that achieves the same things without being actual territorial. Another thing that happened in the middle of the 19th century is the broad spread of mass media. Originally print, later visual, and that the development of the concepts of the brand really kind of stood out to me, because I see that as very much what fascism in the U.S. currently is. It's a brand. It's very identifiable. It's got branded merchandise, and I'm sorry. Yeah, exactly. It's a message widely distributed, but also very individually directed. And that's very much, I don't know how many people here are familiar with like B school or marketing, where you have these kind of this message that is so broad, anybody can identify with it, and everybody identifies with it. So if that's your message and that's your brand, then you're already doing, people are already doing the work to buy in. Oop, we got, yes.
Just to play and evolve on that topic,
Mhm.
what is the danger? Right now, we're seeing this danger. We see the prospect of it, but what is the danger of nepotism? I'm talking about the Trump brand,
Right.
and MAGA merging
Mhm.
into one, and then we truly have nepotism,
Right.
that kind of state.
Oh, sure.
There's a danger to that right now.
Or a dynastic element to it, yeah.
Or a dynastic element, exactly. There's a danger to that because people are associating the Trump brand with nationalism.
Right.
But go ahead, elaborate on
Well, that's the thing is, I don't know that that's ever really been done successfully,
Yeah.
you know? Perhaps, well, I wouldn't even say in the Roman Empire where you have an emperor designating its successor. And there's something either in terms of charisma or force of personality, whatever you want to call it, that seems to be somewhat unique to these individuals, at least in the situation that they are. I mean, yes, you don't really see, I mean, granted, at least in the Nazi and fascist Italy things, you've got military action that boots them from power, but I don't, how do you renew it? How do you make it a dynasty? Because I think so much of it is tied up in, and this, the one issue, at least in, well, that's the thing. Again, is it, you'll see, does Orban step down and have a credible successor? I think part of the problem is that in building up this cult of personality, at least in Nazi Germany, you had the Führer principle, that you had this embodied in this one person was the entire spirit and whatever else that it meant to be German. So when that guy goes, does it just, by magic, does it go to his fail son or the other offing? No, it's a great question. I dig into it more. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's understandable. It's not necessarily, but there's a risk to it, but it hasn't been done really successfully in the real life scenario.
Right.
I get it. All right, you can go ahead.
Okay. Right. And so, and kind of getting back to some of the things that we saw in the word cloud, if we're taking this as a brand or fascism or a particular identifier Trump as a brand, as you reach saturation and monopolies generally have reduced competition down to the bare minimum, what does capitalism have to have? It has to grow. It has to have new markets. So this is where the notion of colonialism in this case, or cultural hegemony turning inward into, it's either seeking new markets abroad or atomizing groups within existing markets. And I think this is a good illustration of what you were saying about, your parents are very anti-Trump, but then there's other things that they're not quite ready to sign on to yet. I feel you. And so the impact on your identity is that you've got these visuals that are appealing to emotions of nationalism, which is, or fear or nostalgia for this perceived golden age. It was it was the First Reich in Nazi Germany, the Holy Roman Empire, where all these German-speaking principalities or whatever were unified. Italy, of course, it's the Roman Empire, and very much of the iconography and even political messaging of that was, let's take it on the march again, basically. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Do you think our nostalgia now is for the 50s or the 80s or a combination of both? I think it's both, right?
I think it depends on-
So the question was, what's the source of sort of the current wave of nostalgia? And I think it's so nebulous, it can be for whatever you want. I think it could, yes, it could be the 50s, but not the 90% capital gains tax rate. It's the fact that,
It's just like make America great again.
Right.
It's vague on purpose.
right,
Because.
and Reagan ran on it in the 80s, yeah. So what was he talking about? Was he talking about the 50s? Was he talking about, well, you know, it really, it's so vague that you really, and I think that's the beauty of it too, is that you don't have to provide an answer because it's all up here. It's all what in the consumer, I mean, did you ever get a specific message from anyone running under, you know, the MAGA brand that they were gonna, yeah, make America great again? Okay, does that mean you're going back to, you know, pre-Roe, like is that 1973, or are we talking about pre-Civil Rights Act, pre-voting rights? It can be whatever the person that you're trying to reach will project into. Right, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I think the answer is, when we say make America great again, the answer is, okay, whether you're eliminating to make America great again.
Correct.
voting rights,
Right.
DEI, environmental rights, all the things that you're eliminating to make, when we say make America green, it's all the things that we're eliminating. And that's your answer. Yeah.
I mean, Trump has specifically cited McKinley, who was president during, he put in the really high tariffs in the late, like the very end of the 19th century. The end of the 19th century. And also but also that was before, you know, they talk about they talk about industrialization, but they're not referencing the 50s with, you know, the protections of unions, the corporate tax rate. They're really referring to the 20s.
Correct.
With really poor conditions. And like, I would like put in, like, specify that like the nationalism of fascism is told through the mythic past.
Right.
Because like, I mean, nationalism, like at least in political science, is like the most important political force, left or right. Because like nationalism could also be like, well, we're the greatest country ever, so of course we could have healthcare for everybody. Like that would be nationalism too. So like it's specifically told through this mythic past of like trying to regain something going back as opposed to going forward.
So yeah, it's everyone here, those who spoke up, and I'm sure those who are who didn't or are participating by Zoom have things that they have in mind that this means to them. So it's this creative use of imagery to create a unified or strong national identity, but it's whatever y'all think. You know, it's not, there's some kind of top-down things, like I'm gonna install these 2 giant flagpoles outside the White House. I'm gonna have this little squeaky tank military parade. Because trust me, don't, you know, it's fine to dunk on stuff like that. It doesn't make you, you know, doesn't mean you're like backsliding in this house liberalism. And the one thing that I think is an interesting offshoot of this, and I forget who brought it up, I think it was you, Rimmel, that in terms of this Mar-a-Lago phase, you know, when you put all the female members of the administration or acolytes kind of side by side, yeah, they've all either had the same work done or they have the same, you know, hairstylist or other things like that. And that's very performative propaganda. Again, getting back to Kristi Noem, yeah, she did that, and now she's on the TV. And I don't know however many of you read the Mother Jones article from earlier this year that kind of went through who's had it done. I printed off a copy. But yeah, again, this is what you do in order to kind of get yourself into the in group so that you actually then become the more powerful person.
To the uniform, like,
Yes.
which is very, relevant.
Mm-hmm. Oh, hang on just a second.
Yeah, you could, like, since the beginning of social media, I mean, we've had everything be about conformity and like kind of create like Instagram influencers, they look the same. And they've looked the same for more than a decade now. Like this predates Trump even. Like, and you have the normalization of like trying to Kardashianify themselves with people, like trying to get the plastic surgery, the like racially ambiguous, whatever. You see that changing now, even with the Kardashians, like now they're going white, but like, but yeah, and even with the thing that I've noticed the most is people wearing crosses again.
Oh, that's right.
When I know you don't go to church.
Right.
Like, like, why are you wearing a cross all of a sudden when you don't go to church, you don't read the Bible, you don't do any of this stuff, but now you're wearing a cross? Very suspicious.
For the first time, I think in human history, men and women have the ability to change the way they look on a
Yes.
very like invasive
Permanent
scale,
basis,
like permanent
yeah.
basis.
And it's less empowering.
Exactly. And like I read, there's this writer that I follow on Substack, Paris Moskowitz, and they wrote an article about this, about like the aesthetics of fascism, how like fascists want all of us to be the same. Like they don't.
Might be the author of this Mother Jones.
Maybe.
Sounds very familiar.
Honestly, probably, because they're a journalist, and that really like opened my eyes to it, like the barrel curls and the filler, like kind of like thing that we see on Fox News or whatever. It's part of the fascist.
Thank you for saying
uniform.
I'm a bad gay. I can't say, I don't have that.
I got you.
There's this,
Was somebody else gonna?
Oh, I was just gonna add on to that because I read this essay by Susan Sontag about like the aesthetics of fascism, and she talks about how in fascism there's both like a repression of sexuality, or like a repression of like sex, but like an aestheticization of sex. So like you kind of like, she was talking about how like in the like 60s, like the kind of like Nazi fetish type thing, like a lot of the fetish stuff like came from like the Nazi aesthetics, where like Nazis themselves were like both like powerful, like sexual, but also like asexual. Like there was something both. So like, even with like the Instagram face, there's something very like, attractive about it, but there's also like no like tension there. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like, there's
there's
no
that simultaneous attraction and revulsion at play.
or it's not even like attraction and revulsion, but it like leaves you cold in a way. Yeah. It's not sexy.
So, to move on to sort of using this. Okay, I'm gonna make sure that I'm not missing anything here. So- Give me just a second. Oh. Maybe we don't have any slides.
We do.
All right. So in 20th century history, kind of getting a little bit deeper into the use of the media and the messaging. So we're all largely familiar, as I've said, kind of with the visual imagery. But this again was, I think, designed for a society that consumed its political content kind of en masse. You'd have rallies with public speeches, which may have been broadcast on the radio, maybe not, or filmed for showing at a movie theater. But these were generally large group events. And this is, I think, the big difference between historical fascism and the way we live now, is that very rarely do we, and especially post-COVID, do we get together in these kinds of numbers. So I don't see this happening that much anymore. You can say that there are analogs in the fact that you have, cable channels that seem to be directed towards one or the other points of view. But the point is, we're not consuming that in large groups. It's mostly in our homes, or if we are, stuck in a bar somewhere and they happen to have whatever TV channel on. Everything now seems, at least in my perspective, to be a lot more targeted. If you're, posting on Twitter or Truth Social, et cetera, that seems very direct, even though however many million people are following this individual, you're seeing it on your computer or on your phone. So it seems more like it's coming to you directly, rather than I was at this, I went to see a movie and there was this newsreel of is it running out of battery? Okay. All right. So that seems fairly new, but I would also say that's kind of the logical result of the last 40 years or so of targeted political advertisements, in which, yeah, you will all see the same, mostly the same TV ads for political candidates, but the mailers that you get are very specific to you because they, again, in good brand strategy, they have each of us down to this kind of combination that they can, again, individually target. And social media algorithms, primarily what they do. So yes, you're getting the same message, but I would say that the delivery method is much more personalized, and getting in kind of the notion of the role of the enemy. It's going to be targeted to you because of what these marketers have identified are your, what are your affinity groups? Are you, are you a man, a woman? Are you married? Are you single? So it's just, again, we're in this stew, and it's really hard to get out. One thing I think is always interesting is that when you talk about, capitalist versus non-capitalist or anti-capitalist, it's, it's all totalitarian, the media is state controlled, you only get one line. Do you really think that's all that different here? I mean, the media outlets are basically all either conglomerated or controlled by larger companies, and media has become a commodity just like everything else in a capitalist economy. And there was a really good quote, and this is from Theodore Adorno and Horkheimer, I can't remember his first name. Back in 1944, if you read their article about mass culture, boy, does it just, they're talking about like movies and radio as opposed to TV and, text messages. But they're saying that cultural monopolies are weak and they can't afford to neglect their appeasement of the real holders of power, who are the business owners. And so everything becomes style. And that's getting back to a little bit of the aesthetics where we're talking about, you have the barrel curl and the facial, the lip filler and other things along those lines. And it has to be, because anything else is potentially disobedient to what the existing hierarchies are. To give kind of a more current example of, what is the description of any woman that dares to defy or have an, opposite opinion and express it to Donald Trump. It's like nasty. And that word is so tied up with not just personality aspects, but, physical appearance and other things like that. So from an aesthetic standpoint, it's, I'll just wrap up here. I would argue that I think that then becomes, again, internalized for those who are seeking power, or if you don't want to draw attention to yourself, you start maybe dressing a little bit differently. You don't wear, I will aid and abet abortion, which I need to actually get that, unless you're Abby, because she rocks. The last little bit I wanted to talk about, I think, and how much some of this has changed in terms of propaganda events. When I talked about, these were mass events, mass rallies, other things like that. Another thing that Donald Trump is obsessed with is the size of his crowds. That I would say that is a bit of a distraction, because in absolute numbers, they're minuscule. I tried finding just some actual numbers, and I think at least in the 2024 campaign, the average attendance of his rallies was just about 5,500. Harris was about 13,000. You see how that played out. Or he sold out Madison Square Garden, which has 20,000 seats. The Nuremberg Stadium, where they're filming all these things, holds hundreds of thousands of people. Does it matter? Because I would say you have 5,500, 2,000, whatever. What's the only thing you're seeing? What the camera captures. So they pack right, like it's like basketball, and behind the goal or football. in the end zone. It's like, that's what you see. And that's what they want you to see, not the thousands of empty seats there. And that's what gets repeated day in and day out, is that particular image. The, coming back to something that we talked about also in terms of aesthetics and propaganda, is this militarism. And it's, I call it kind of the soft militarism or jingoism of public events. You know, when did you last hear the Star Spangled Banner? At a baseball game, at a hockey, you know, do you hear it any other time? Hardly. 4th of July, maybe. Why? Why there? Why did, you know, why is that the tradition? Well, interestingly enough, it started off, at least in Major League Baseball, in 1918, because the International Workers of the World threw a couple of bombs, and all of a sudden, we need to make what used to be just your, you know, the America's pastime becomes an opportunity to make it America's pastime. You know, capital A, capital M, the rest of it. You know, military flyovers at the most basic of games. What on earth? What, you know, why do you need to project force on your own population?
I was watching a panel on TV. He was saying like, oh, this bullshit's such a waste of money. Like, why? No, he said, oh, all this patriotism is so stupid. And then when I framed it as in, oh yeah, it's a waste of money. It's all part of the military industrial complex. He turned on me and goes, right. Oh, you're anti-American. I'm like, what the hell, man? You just said the same thing.
And to, you know, to draw it from my own personal experience, I'm sorry, somebody else have, yeah, I don't.
So outside of like baseball games, I'm 20, so I don't know how young people are here, but I was just like 5 years ago, I was at Western high school, and every single day we had to stand up and we had to do the national anthem. We had to put our hand on our heart and sing
The Pledge of Allegiance. They pledge
Oh yeah, not the Pledge of Allegiance. Sorry, yeah, but so I do. I remember in elementary school, there was like a couple of days out of the week where like they did play the national anthem for some reason. But something that radicalized me very early on is that when I was at Western, there was like every couple of weeks there was like someone threatening to shoot up the school,
Right.
or someone coming in on campus with an actual weapon and then getting detained. But I still had to get up every day and do the do the Pledge of Allegiance every single day. I feel like a lot of younger people, I'm not saying this is like the main reason, but I feel like part of the reason why many younger people are more progressive than they are conservative is because of kind of resentment to that, saying like, why do I have to stand up every single day, do the Pledge of Allegiance, while I'm over here getting shut up,
Right.
like as like a 13-year-old in a classroom. I feel like that's backfiring. And just another thing on like social media, I already had that kind of resentment to America and the aesthetics of American nationalism, and social media helped, introduce me to many, figures like Hassan Piker and that sort of thing. I feel like what social media does, it doesn't make people more like a lot of time it does make people a lot more right wing, but I feel like it radicalizes people more than it does people one ideology over the other. So I that's why I feel like
conversations with people in DSA, males mostly, who have said to me at some point they were, largely based on online content, but have gone either way.
I don't know some like a younger person who's a centrist. Like there's very little people who are like, I'm for the Democratic establishment as that's true. That's one of the few people who's like, I'm for the Democratic establishment, who's like young. People are either like, I'm at the very least social democrat, or there's very little in between. So I find that's what I find interesting about, and how social media can actually be helpful towards getting people to like be educated and get the knowledge on that sort of thing, like me.
And I've gone on long enough, but I think this is a good point to raise, echoes, sort of point number 7. I don't know if we have it up on the screen. I'm going to read it. That in this fascism is that in the absence of any other identity, the only one is to be born in the same country.
I kind of just simplified the.
Yeah, that's fine. You know, so that's all you're left with is that, you know, were you born in the US? And is that even the case now?
No.
What does it mean to be born in the US? You know, who are your, oh. Right, you know, this push to eliminate birthright or alter, you know, birthright citizenship. I'm just
Keep
about
going. No,
done.
no, you keep
Yeah.
going. My laptop's, the charger's not working. I'm gonna.
Ah, gotcha. So I've gone on too long. One thing I did was when I was trying to get some ideas for sort of how to wrap this up or present tools for protecting yourself against this being propagandized, is that if you search online for tools for resisting propaganda, the first hit is something from the Rand Corporation, which I just found hilarious. And I don't think that we can depend on the same system that got us into fascism at least twice to really do a good job of of avoiding it or not getting there. So I think, as with everything, you know, media literacy is the kind of convenient shorthand. Just make use of what's available to you, but you know, find alternate sources when and where you can, and importantly, follow and fund what you like. That's a form of capitalism I think that we can all kind of get on board with. But you also don't have to do it yourself. You know, find trusted intermediaries, such as bloggers or other aggregators that maybe either can condense things, make it a little bit more easy for you. But again, just always be questioning. You know, who is telling you this? Why are they telling it to you? What are they telling you? And how are they telling it to you? And I think I want to leave with a little bit of Michael Parenti. This is from Black Shirts and Reds, which is a great read, fairly short. You can even get it through the Broward County Library. No, not yet. So this was written in, I think, the early to mid 90s, sort of at, you know, the end of history and the oh, I forget whatever the rest of that stupid construction by Fukuyama is. He subtitles this "Learning to Ask Why." When we think without Marxist perspective, that is, without considering class interests and class power, we seldom ask why certain things happen. Many things are reported in the news, but fewer are explained. Little is said about how the social order is organized and whose interests prevail. Devoid of a framework that explains why things happen, we are left to see the world as do mainstream media pundits, as a flow of events, a scatter of particular developments and personalities unrelated to a larger set of social relations, propelled by happenstance, circumstance, confused intentions, and individual ambition, never by powerful class interests, and yet producing effects that serve such interests with impressive regularity. So my takeaway from that would be, again, just if you're going to be critical about this, be critical about it and think who benefits from the way this story is told or the means in which this story is told. Is there information that I'm missing out? And always, ABQ, always be, you know, always be questioning. You know. So not the most fun part, but I hope I passed along some helpful information, or at least my perspective on it. Do you have any questions?
Oh, absolutely. No, thank you for coming. Great presentation. And you'll be set for the next Saturday. People start running.
I think we need to have like literacy, because like I'm a reading teacher, and I could tell you like a lot of the ways that like Trump speak, like they speak in metaphor. So like when you're just being like, well, that's not exactly right. It's like, okay, but you're like missing the point, like completely. You know, like when you
How
start.
many times have we told him to take it literally, but
Yeah.
not seriously?
Exactly. Or like, you
Yeah.
know, like when people talk about like, oh, his crowd sizes. Well, the crowd size is synecdoche for his popularity in the country. Like he
Right.
brags about crowd sizes and be like, I'm so popular and these people aren't popular, blah, 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 whatever. You know, that's why during the first inauguration, when he lost the popular vote, he was going on and on about lying about the crowd size. Second time when he wins the popular vote, doesn't matter how many people showed up because he won the popular vote. Even the wall, like the wall is a symbol. It's not something that actually needs to be delivered upon. It's a symbol for restricting immigration. So people don't hold him. So like,
Or who's in and who's out.
exactly. So like, if we're like, we need to kind of think about it less logically in a way and more literate or figuratively instead of literally, because that's also how we could form our own arguments to better combat it. Because if we're just fighting on like the facts of it, of course they're not telling the truth, but they're speaking to like emotional truths, or like they're speaking to truths but not literally. You know, they're speaking to truths that like people are like, okay, well, they're kind of right. So like when you get into like the facts about it, you're like, you feel that they're right more than you know that they're right. You know, and we have to be willing to, you know, it's always like, oh, the facts, whatever, and like that is important, but like also kind of knowing how to communicate to people and not, you know, kind of using, because if like, you know, fascism is inverted socialism, we have to take their things and invert it back.
I think that like leads perfectly into the next section, which is anti-fascism, fighting fascism, right? I know we're like kind of running out of time because everyone has so many really good thoughts and questions. So thank you for that. But I do think it's like really important to talk about how do we fight fascism. We all agree that fascism is a problem. So what do we do about it? And I think it's really important to say no and to take a stand in our daily lives, because I think we all talked about how ingrained this culture of like really selfishness is, and about like, I'm just doing my job, you know, that's what they say. ICE agents, cops, like whoever it may be, capitalists, like we're just doing our job, and it's just not acceptable. We can't accept it in our lives anymore, because no one is going to come and save us, right? We're all participating in various ways, and we have to stop, or we're just going to stay on this trajectory. So I would really love if we could just like really quickly, like if anybody wants to share a way, a like tangible strategy that they know of, that they've done, or that they've like seen of fighting fascism, or something that you think we could do.
Not so much as an idea, it's more a question that if anybody wants to chime in to tell me if I'm crazy or not. This question might be because of the community I'm from, you know, more, you know, Miami-Dade, the Cuban Hispanic community are more opposed to socialist ideas. I was wondering, how can we reclaim a lot of the stuff that fascists in America, for instance, the flag, and I'm not saying this in like a liberal way, it's more like, how can we reclaim patriotism to be about, let's improve our country in the way that we feel it should be improved, instead of letting, I guess, the fascists use them as like rallying points for fascist ideas. I don't know if I'm, you know, I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
Are you gonna answer that question, or are you going to thoughts?
I can add. Yeah. I was gonna say that like I think the most important thing is to not give an inch to them, and to like really stand firm in your beliefs. Like, you know, we meant Zoran was brought up at the beginning of this. Like he did not back down from any of his stances because he's right and he knows it, and he's not like, you know, on immigration. The highest point of support for immigration in this country was in 2018, because Democrats were so against Trump's immigration policy and they were so aggressive in defending immigrants that, you know, combined with his anti-immigrant policies at the time, but like the rhetoric with Democrats and Trump's anti-immigrant policies that were unpopular made it so that like immigration had like the highest support at any time. So like, because they stood for what was right at that time, they were able to win. Because like at the end of the day, like I think as like socialists, we kind of believe that like we believe more to like the better angels of people. And like I think that just flipping, like taking patriotism, like it's like a slippery slope, but just kind of being like, well, you know what? I think that if you're not paying your fair share of taxes, you're being anti-American. Like just, oh, you don't want to, like, oh, you're gonna leave the country. Oh, like what? Suddenly you have to pay for your part of the country and like you're gonna leave like that. Like, what the heck is wrong with you? People kind of be like, yeah, you're kind of right. Like, it doesn't have to be like, and we're gonna bomb it out of them, whatever. Like, but it could just be like, well, you're part of this country too, and like kind of the idea that like if you're part of this country, you have obligations to each other. And like making patriotism more of like an obligation to help your neighbor, as opposed to like holding up this idea of America being this like, imperialist superpower.
Michael.
Yeah, I have 2 points, one for the question and one for what Nick mentioned. One example, and I wish Zach was here, he repeats it all the time, is that with strong labor unions, you can push for a contract that basically doesn't allow groups like ICE to do like raids in your workplace. Like that's a great example of like ICE doing these attacks on people and deporting them and everything is very fascistic. And using what you have, organizing the workplace is the place to start, but also setting the boundaries where it's like, no, we meet those demands. We want this in our workplace. And that allows a mechanism to push back against that. To Nick's question, I think oftentimes where the patriotism of America is a very very thin and hollow ideology. Because if you think about essentially immigrants in general, but particularly the European immigrants that came to America early on, the ones who basically claim this is our turf now or whatever, they're, for lack of better words, they're a diaspora. And that basically means you're distant and pulled away from your original country and home and everything. And so when you have a sense, like when you have that feeling of that need to build on like where's my belonging and my identity and all that kind of stuff, I think that we can't necessarily, how I see it is, you can't necessarily bring in like a fully like new, or bring back, I should say, a new a former patriotism. It really has to be a new patriotism, and looking at the fact that it's like almost all of us in this, I assume in this room are not originally from here, and my parents are Dominican, and then I know that other people is coming from Italy and blah 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 blah. That idea of pushing it's a little cheesy when people go like, oh, we're an immigrant country, but that is that's the patriotism. Like that's when I start to go like, it's very cheesy to be like the Statue of Liberty, but like it hits for people because of the ideology behind it, and that is something that to expand on, instead of this like, this is what we are. We're, this Anglo-Saxon and God we trust type of patriotism. If your culture sucks, make a new culture, and I think that a lot of American patriotism, a lot of American culture is we are at that point now where we have to form new culture and form a new identity. And I think it's very difficult, but it's necessary.
Yeah, I want to say, just like building off of what Michael said, like sanctuary unions is like a big thing right now, but also like anybody can do that. If you're not in a union, you can get together with your neighbors and you can say, we don't want ICE in our neighborhood. And you can go on patrols. You can start a immigration like support hub. There are like so many options and ways that we can like be more proactive about how we're fighting fascism. Yeah, Remy.
I will say I've been actually inspired by you, Abby. I think you do a great job of like when we talk about like techno anti-fascism, like not using Google Docs, like not like trying to abide by BDS, like things like that we can, like individual choices. I think I mean, and I have a sister who's 19, and I know you were talking about like young people being like very like kind of like on one end of the spectrum or the other, but what she talks about a lot is like a lot of apathy amongst her peers. Like they just don't care. And I think we are in a point in society where we feel like our individual choices don't matter, but I think we have to come back to a point where we say like, yeah, they do actually. Like it does matter if you like don't buy that like can of Coke, if you like don't use Microsoft, like those things like as a collective, they start to make a difference.
Because they're practicing like saying no, right? And saying like, that's not right, and I'm not going to participate in it. Okay, we're a little on time, so if anybody who hasn't spoken, want to say anything?
Yeah, sorry, Michael, go back over there, please.
You want to do next time?
That we could use is like, I come from like a DIY sort of underground scene culture myself, you know? So, I mean, like rave culture, punk culture was all about, you know, do it yourself, spread your own message and, you know, do it any way you can, week pace, do your zines, talk to people. And like the way we can do it now is through social media. You make your posts on Instagram or whatever, on YouTube, and just spread that message and that's how we practice perception management against the big corporations. And yes, they might get shut down, they might like block you or whatever, but as long as you can get that message out there, you know, as long as you can, you know, and as loudly as you can. Mean, have parties, do a big, you know, a big event or with music and things like that, you know, and just like get people out there and like unify them that way, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially
The
like-
fun of it.
Yeah, make it, the revolution has to be fun too.
Yeah.
I mean,
These like these Trump backing billionaires, should we even be on? Like, you know, like we could use them to our own ends, but like at some point, like we're also helping create the thing that's destroying us.
Well, and one thing that is probably tied into the last slide that's up there is that one thing that I personally have gotten out of this in the relatively short time that I've been a part is the chance to be affiliated with groups that are doing their best and like soften the realities of what we're going through, whether it's clinic defense, you know, feeding all comers at Food Not Bombs, what else would I do? Like, you know, putting people together or connecting people with resources that will allow that rather than just kind of getting into despair is that here's what we can do. And so there's lots of opportunities to do that within this chapter and within, I think, the wider leftist community in South Florida anyway, so.
All right, one more and then we're gonna move on to the next.
Yeah, I just think, I'm not sure who organized this, but, Abby and Michael, this is the start. Education is key. That's our greatest weapon right there, education. We have to like relentlessly attack ignorance. And you're doing this, but you're doing that action right here by having this speaking series. We're being educated. We're arming ourselves with knowledge. That's the greatest weapon. And with that, we could defeat fascism. So I think that's the greatest weapon is education, getting that message out there, making people aware of what this idea is, making them aware that it is dangerous. It is an anathema to our values as an American people. We are founded as a liberal republic, not some type of ultra-nationalist cult. That's how I describe fascism. It's a cult. It's a collective cult. That's what I said. So that's all I'm going to say because I know time is short. So thank you, Abby, and whoever else organized. This is how we educate and community organizing.
Okay. Connecting the message to DSA. Okay, define democratic socialism. Democratic socialism believes workers as a whole, the working class democratically control the political system. Workers effectively controlling the overall direction and functioning of the economy through democratic processes. What is crucial to understand is that once in power, fascism essentially eliminates traditional democratic rights. I mean, that's the thing I used before, like calcifying, solidifying these class relations. So what is our theory of change? What is DSA, all about? What are its mechanisms that it tries to use? It is very much a broad approach, which I think is effective in myriad ways. You need as many tools as possible if you're going to go up against such a large machine. Building working class power is a very big one. We have a labor working group. That is one that has been really doing great stuff lately. Our electoral direct action. So electoral and direct action, again, very much broad, two different tools for the same end goals. Our electoral working group is actually very recent. It just started, and it's exciting because obviously, shout out again, Zoran. We got a email recently from our regional field organizer who basically is like, hey, this is a huge deal. We need to at least have in mind where we can go from here. And then direct action on the other end, mutual aid and prioritizing that community trust, literally emotional trust and a physical, trust. And democratize. I switched chargers.
No problem.
Sorry. Democratize the economy. Fight for public goods, worker control, an economy that serves people. Again, it's not always the perfect example, but a public library. I love the public library. I think that, I don't use it physically as much digitally, but the library economy is very much an idea that I resonate with. Challenge oppression. This is very much a thing that I told a friend of mine. I'll make a personal example. A friend of mine who's relatively apolitical got really upset recently. His family, one of his family members, I'm gonna not put too much detail on it. One of his family members got detained by ICE. There's someone who wasn't super political, and I've always tried to, any chance I can get, explain my politics. And he ran into everyone in his community, a decent amount of people who kind of just were like, well, that's what happened. Very much callous. Just super callous. And I told him, we had a really intense conversation. I said, yeah, I have certain things, because he's like, how do I talk to people like this when they say things like this? I'm like, just as though people have the air and room to feel comfortable enough to say awful, bigoted things to you, they feel comfortable, you shouldn't allow that. You should feel comfortable standing up for these things. I work predominantly in a more women-centric, I'm a flight attendant, so I work with a lot of women. Unfortunately, like Rima was mentioning, the whole feminism movement, they're really eating that shit up in a very concerning way. So I get a lot of transphobic comments, and I have a few things where I go one second. I have a few things that I'm very much, red line on. And I'm like, if you're in my vicinity and I overhear this, I have to do something about it, especially because you're comfortable enough looking at me and saying, oh, I can say some horrible, horrendous shit. So I always push back against it. I always try to do it in a way where I'm not, being like, you're a transphobe. I'm not going to immediately start throwing, labels out. But I go, what do you mean by that? Can we talk about this? Or you want to talk about this? Let's talk about this, because it seems like it's on your mind, kind of giving the possible out, but at the same time, I'm like, you want to say some shit? We'll go toe to toe with this one. And then the last one, and I'll point it to you. The last one, mass independent organization. Growing DSA is a powerful democratic multiracial working class movement. This was a very small group when I started, and it's growing, and we're getting more and more members involved. And also, I don't always want to make the pitch every chance I can get, but also with our membership comes funding, and that is a huge deal, because the goal is long-term being able to use that to do things like community fridges and fund, campaigns and pressure campaigns and all these things that we want to do. We can't do that without money. We have to challenge, but there's way more of us, and collectively, just like you see, DSA campaigns where it's like small dollar donations, you can raise a lot over time if you collectivize. Al, you're saying?
I just wanted to clarify what you were saying with the feminism. You're talking about those terms, right?
Yeah, I'm just saying, it's kind of melded and mushed. I'm not like bell hooks, that's a good feminist, and what's kind of happened, this whole third way feminism?
Yeah, third wave is bastardization.
Yeah.
If those women even call themselves feminists.
Yeah, exactly. Touche, exactly. Yeah, and again, I oftentimes too, going back to that, I work with a few a few straight men, and they got a lot of opinions and got a lot of feelings about the fact that they're working in a workforce that is predominantly women. And then they also say some shit to me, and I gotta push back. I'm like, we're not. You want to do this? We'll talk about this, bro. Let's go. So anyway, is that the last slide pretty much? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I love DSA. If you're not in DSA already and you haven't signed up, please do. You can talk to any one of us. Honestly, it's a great org. And am I missing anything?
We're democratic in our, we're democratic, but not democratic.
Correct.
Yes, oh yeah, that is a common, yeah. The other one I say is I'm in DSA and people think I say TSA. And that's always really fun. I'm like, no, very different.
Somebody else in DSA, they're like, oh, so you like Biden? I'm like, no.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, you like Trump? I'm like, no.
But
Yeah, if anybody has questions about DSA, or also if you have any feedback about the teaching, like anything you liked or anything that you didn't like, so we can like take that forward to the next teaching, would love to hear that.
I think you should do a teaching on how to combat anti-socialist propaganda. Stuff that you hear from people when people
Oh,
ask,
that's
"Hey,
a-
what do you
that's a-
believe?"
that's a
and you
good
tell
one.
them and they go, oh, but that's great, and that's.
yeah.
Like practicing
Million
having those
people there.
conversations, yeah. That's a really good one.
If you want, and if you think about this later, you can, if you're not in our Discord already, or if you want to email us and give us your feedback, honestly.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. For anybody who's not like plugged in, are you in the Discord?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. Cause there's like a myriad of ways of reaching out to us. So like if you're on Instagram, we have an Instagram that we like update a lot. We have an email list. We have the Discord. And if you want me to just text you and tell you what we're doing, I'll give you my number.
Yeah.
Like,
You can also subscribe to our Google Calendar.
Yep.
And get them automatically updated there too, but we have many ways to get.
The last thing I'll say, and it's also speaking to the emphasis on the democratic social. I do joke. I say you're saying the same thing twice, democratic socialism, but that's obviously that's a spicy
Contentious,
take
yeah.
for some. But anyway, but to show that what is it called? The proof of the group itself is oftentimes people will have ideas and they go, hey, I think this should be implemented. And they'll discuss it at our general body meetings, or they'll write a resolution, which is always best because then we have it in writing, obviously. And they'll present these ideas and they'll start a working group, or they'll start an action. And I'm co-chair, and I promise you I don't rule with like an iron fist here. I try my best to, that's why I emphasize like feedback, like please feedback. I have no idea which direction. I mean, I have a general idea, but there is a direction that we all have in mind and that can all benefit us. And we can't do it if people are sitting on their hands or they're not speaking up. And it's always best if people are telling us like, hey, I really love this, or I've had people go straight up to me and be like, hey, what, like, I want to talk to you about this. And it'll sometimes be a little bit more confrontational, but usually it's very constructive. But I'd rather that than people be like, I can't talk to this person, and I want that for all of us. I want that for the entire org as a whole. Because if we can't speak to each other, then we can't speak to our communities, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah, I guess the last thing would just be like, obviously all of those places, you can see all of our events, but just to like reiterate, we have like so many things going on. So there are lots of things you can come to. Every first Thursday of the month, we have our general body meeting where we kind of go over like everything, updates from like all the different working groups and like upcoming events, and we vote on stuff. And then every single working group has a monthly meeting. Both of those things are on Zoom, so like super easy to come to. And then we do other stuff all the time. So yeah. Thank you all for coming. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, seriously.
Thank you. Really good conversation. Really appreciate it.
Is this Zoom? I think it's Zoom. I think we can close.
You can close the Zoom. Does anybody have
like what's his name? I think the general population of Zoran who just signed up, like how many people like him are like now seeing, like kind of being like, well, you know what, like we tried with me to like, you know, like the establishment or whatever, and like that didn't get us anywhere. So like maybe there will be more like reasonable to you know, like even if after you say, well, we don't want to be fun. So
We've talked about like,
I mean, like
no, I'm just saying, we like always wanna do more outreach, we like always try to, like, we're trying to expand like